is the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. This tonight is about the and culture part of our name, which obviously is pretty broad, and so that's what this one will be about. Although if you've read the book, you know there's an awful lot of family involved in this Dante adventure as well. As you can see, we have some handheld mics when it comes time for Q&A. Please raise your hand and wait for the mic to get there because we are filming and also live streaming, and the only way that everyone else who watches this will know what your question is if they can hear it. So you don't have to be on camera, but we will want to capture your voice so people will know what the question is. We also, as Thomas mentioned, have sign-in sheets coming around. Those, while there is a box there for the Wilson Forum, that's not just for students. Tell us who you are, and we'll make sure that you know about other events like this as they come along. Also, if you have your cell phones with you, do two things for me. First, take them out and follow us on Twitter, ATX Institute, and then turn them on silent. And so that would be great. We, in the lead up to this event, as we do with a number of our events, we have been having a book giveaway, and I don't know if he's here or watching online or just will get an email, but Rob Mall is the winner of the book, so he will get How Dante Can Save Your Life. So with that, I'll introduce our speaker is Rod Dreher, as you all undoubtedly know. He's the senior editor at the American Conservative. He has written and edited for the New York Post, the Dallas Morning News, National Review, the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, the Washington Times, and the Baton Rouge Advocate. His commentary has been published in the Wall Street Journal, Commentary Magazine, The Weekly Standard, BeliefNet, Real Simple, and he has appeared on NPR, ABC News, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and the BBC. Not bad for a boy from a small Louisiana town. So we are very pleased to have him here tonight, and I know that we're all looking forward to what he has to say, not what I have to say, so I'm going to turn it over to him now. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I have to beg your pardon. I'm going to have to hold my water with me. I went to Italy last week for doing some research for this book I'm working on, and for my sins, I caught a sinus infection. As soon as I landed back in Louisiana, we had about a day to turn around and come back over here. And I think it was when we got to the Buc-ee's outside of Houston. I just kind of, I wondered what planet I was on. Like, how do you explain this place to an Italian? And my poor wife, she was just like, just sit there and be quiet and take your Sudafed. Everything will be okay. So I hope that everything's okay tonight. And if not, just blame Sudafed. Well, I don't much like poetry at all, and I never have. I think it's a character flaw, but it's there. Well, that's what makes what happened to me when I stumbled into Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy all the more miraculous. Dante's epic saved my life. This medieval masterpiece, perhaps the greatest poem ever written, reached me when I thought I was unreachable and lit the way out of a dark wood. It was a dark wood of depression, of confusion, and a stress-related autoimmune disease that, had it persisted, likely would have led to lymphatic cancer. Dante helped me understand the mistakes and the mistaken beliefs that brought me to this dead end. He showed me that I had the power to change and revealed to me how to do so. Most important of all, the poet gave me a renewed vision of life and brought me closer to God than I ever imagined possible. I'm going to tell you this evening how Dante saved my life, and in so doing, I am, I hope, going to tell you how he can save your life, or at least change your life for the better. Trigger warning. This is going to be a story about God. It's the Divine Comedy. But even if you don't believe in God, there are profound lessons in the Commedia, as it's called in the original Italian, about life and how to live it. A masterpiece like the Divine Comedy does not last for 800 years if it doesn't speak to the depths of the human condition, the universal human condition. The Commedia shows us a way of looking at life and ourselves, a way that draws us away from egotism and towards selfless love. That's something every one of us needs. I was born and raised in Star Hill, a rural community in South Louisiana. It was my dad, my mom, my younger sister Ruthie, and me. We were country people, but in my case, I was a city person who lived in the country and wanted to get out. I had a happy childhood for the most part, but I always knew I didn't really belong. I wasn't good at sports. I didn't care for hunting, and I didn't like country music or cowboy boots. What I did like was books, and I spent most of my childhood with my head buried in them. Now, my father was a strong man. He was a wise man and a man of compassion and great tenderness to us children. But he really couldn't hide his disappointment in me for not being the country boy son that he wanted. In fact, my sister, who was a real tomboy, was a son he never had. And that rejection of my dad was a wound that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I don't want to give you the impression that we didn't get along. We were very close, and we talked almost every day of our lives. But there was that distance, and it started in childhood. Well, I moved away as an adult to work as a journalist, mostly on the East Coast, but after a time also in Dallas. My sister Ruthie, she stayed home and married her high school sweetheart, started a family, built a house right across the yard from my mom and dad, right where we were raised, and she taught in a local public school. She lived the life that my dad wanted for me, and she died young of cancer in 2011. Wanting to help my grieving family, my brother-in-law, his kids, my mom and dad, my wife Julie and I packed up our kids and our things and moved from Philadelphia, where we were living at the time, down to rural South Louisiana, a town of 1,700 people. I thought this homecoming was going to be a Hollywood happy ending. I wasn't the prodigal son exactly, because I had not lived a life of wasting what I had been given. But I was a prodigal in the eyes of my family in Star Hill, because I had, for most of my life, wasted the chance to live there with them and wasted this inheritance that I had been given of this way of life, and our family had been in this town for 5 generations. And why would you leave us? Why? But I was home now, so I thought all that was in the past. Well, things did not turn out like I expected. My sister's 2 younger children, the one still at home, kept us at a distance, and we couldn't figure out why. My sister's oldest daughter, who was in college, finally revealed the reason to us. Their sainted mother had raised the girls to think badly of us because we were city people in her eyes, and they were taught not to trust us. And my father had encouraged them in thinking this way. Well, I confronted my dad with this information when my niece told me, and he couldn't admit to it directly, but he did confirm it over and over and over again. It was as if the prodigal son story from the Bible had ended with the father taking the side of the envious older brother and refused to let his long-lost son cross the threshold into his home. Well, this was a hell of a blow for me, and I fell into a depression. I also became physically ill. I developed chronic mononucleosis. A rheumatologist did a bunch of testing and said the only explanation for it was a deep and constant stress. He asked me, "Why are you stressed? What are you stressed about?" And I told him. And he said, "Well, you better leave Louisiana then, or you're going to destroy your health." I said, "I can't leave. You know, I've moved my family around the country so many times, my wife and kids, I can't make them move again. And besides, my mom and dad are difficult, but I'm the only child they have left. I need to be here for them." And he said, "Well, you better find your way to some inner peace, brother, or you're not going to make it." So, this is where I was in the late summer of 2013, my back against the wall. I was sleeping most of the day. I felt horrible. I was useless. My family, my wife and my kids, they needed me, and I couldn't be there for them because I didn't want to leave the house, and I didn't feel strong enough to leave the house some days. Julie told me, "We can't keep living like this. You've got to see a therapist to get on top of this anxiety and this anger you're feeling." Well, the idea of seeing a therapist was repulsive to me, but by then I was so weak and sleeping so many hours a day and so sick of walking around like my whole body was a cold, wet blanket that I humbled myself and submitted to therapy. So on the first day, my therapist asked me for my story, why are you here? And I told him. And at the end of our session, he told me, you can't change your family, but you can change how you react to your family, and that's what we're going to learn how to do. And I thought, oh, okay, thanks, Dr. Phil. That's nice. We may get there eventually, but I was very skeptical because I had everything figured out in my head. Well, around that same time, I found myself in a bookstore in Baton Rouge. For some reason, I was in the poetry section. As I said, I don't read much poetry or I don't read much fiction at all. I'm constantly reading, but what I'm reading is nonfiction. But there I was, standing in front of the poetry section, and there at the top of the shelf was the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. I had always thought that one day I might get around to reading the Divine Comedy. In fact, my bookshelf at home, about half of it are books that I want to have read, but I don't want to actually go through the trouble of reading them. I figured that, I missed it in college, I missed it in high school, there's really no point now. It'll be like trying to scale Mount Everest, the literary Mount Everest. Still having nothing better to do that afternoon, I pulled the book off the shelf, opened it up, and read these words. Midway in the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost. And I thought, wow, he's talking about me. I'm in my mid-40s. I thought that I was doing just fine, but here I am. I found myself in this dark woods in the middle of the journey of my life. I don't know how I got here. I don't know where to go. This is kind of amazing. So I kept reading through the first 2 cantos or chapters of the Inferno, the first book in the trilogy, and I was instantly caught up in the drama. Here, presented to me in the poem, was a man who was trapped in a thicket of fear and confusion, and he was powerless to escape. Dante's verse captured the feeling of my own depression and anxiety precisely. In the poem, wild animals blocked the pilgrim Dante's path at every turn, and suddenly, out of the mist appears the shade of the great poet of antiquity, Virgil. He appears before Dante and promises to show him how to get out of there, how to save his life, how to get to a good place. But first he has to go through a pretty difficult and hard walk, says Virgil, and he has to trust Virgil, that Virgil will take him where he needs to be. Well, Dante, the pilgrim, doesn't know whether he should trust Virgil or not, but he also knows that if he stays there, he's going to die. So he picks up his things and he follows Virgil out of hell. I ended up buying a copy of the book and began my own walk out of my personal darkness with Dante as my Virgil. So why did the poet Dante Alighieri find himself in a dark wood in the middle of the journey of his own life? By the year 1300, that's the year in which the Commedia is set, Dante Alighieri was on top of the world in Florence. He was an acclaimed poet and a member of the cultural elite in Florence, which was at that time one of the richest and most powerful cities in all of Europe. He was elected as one of the city's priors or governors. Politics was a very dangerous business in medieval Florence. Once, when Dante was tricked into going out of town on a diplomatic mission to the Vatican, the Pope tricked him into leaving, there was a coup. The Pope's people got into power. The new leader stripped Dante of all his standing, took all his money, and told him if he ever set foot in Florence again, they were going to kill him. Dante himself had seen them burn people at the stake in Florence, and he knew this was no bluff. He lost everything overnight, and he was never able, by the way, to go back to Florence again. After a few years of living in poverty, wandering around Italy, depending on the kindness of others just to give him his daily bread, he began thinking about what happened to him and started writing this poem, the Commedia, called the comedy because it has a happy ending. It's not a tragedy. The Commedia is the classic journey of the hero, told in a Christian key. The hero takes a journey into far, strange lands, battles dragons, and returns home with treasure to share with the people. In Dante's case, the journey was into the imaginative realms of the afterlife, hell, purgatory, and heaven. But it is also, of course, a journey into Dante's own heart, a pilgrimage of self-discovery to determine where he went wrong in life and how he can get back to the straight path. Now, as we have seen earlier, Dante the pilgrim can't get out of the dark wood under his own power. The point for us to take is this: you can't save yourself on your own. You need a trustworthy guide, someone who has passed that way before. Progress is impossible without humility. You have to admit that you can't do it on your own. You are powerless over your own brokenness, and you need help. We're used to hearing that kind of language associated with 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous. But sin, as Dante called it, works like in the same way as an addiction. About that word sin, I've been a practicing Christian for most of my adult life, and I believe that sin is a real thing. But I never really moved past the version of sin that I was taught in Sunday school, that sin was breaking the rules. Well, the Divine Comedy showed me a new way, which is actually an ancient way of thinking about sin that was key to leading me out of my own dark wood. It's something that I encourage you to consider even if you're not religious. In Dante, whose thinking, by the way, is deeply informed by St. Augustine, sin is disordered love. When we love the wrong things, we sin. When we love the right things in the wrong way, we sin. We can sin by loving too much, or we can sin by loving too little. Our love of good things, of family, of faith, of country, and so forth, can become twisted into hatred. In Dante, our tendency towards sin, towards vice, is a tendency, therefore, towards disordered love. To be forgiven of sin in a theological sense is not the same thing as being healed of the disposition towards sinfulness. That would require getting our loves in harmony. And this is something that you cannot think your way out of. You can't think your way out of the dark wood. This is not a problem in your head. It's a problem of the will, which is to say, of the heart. This was news to me. The Commedia is divided into three parts: the Inferno, the Purgatorio, and the Paradiso. It's a real shame that the only book of the Commedia most people ever read is Inferno, because you can't properly understand Inferno without reference to the other two. There's a happy ending here. It doesn't just end with tortures in hell. In any case, Inferno shows us the state of sinners who die without repentance, without turning away from their sins and asking for mercy. Inferno is, as we know, a catalog of torture. I mean, that's one of the reasons high school kids really like it, because it's very gruesome and it can even be funny. There's even one scene in Inferno where a demon takes a trumpet and farts into it and makes a song. And this is not a Donald Trump joke, actually. This is Dante. But in fact, Inferno is a psychologically acute portrait of the myriad ways in which we human beings deceive ourselves when we place fulfilling our selfish desires above all other goods. In his journey through hell, the pilgrim Dante, and note, of course, that Dante is the main character in a poem by the poet Dante. The pilgrim Dante awakes to the reality of sin and how it disfigures the human personality. He's forgotten this in his life, and that's why he made such a mess of things and ended up in the dark wood. Well, the walk through the Inferno is in truth a pretty frightening pilgrimage into one's own heart. That's what it was for me. In nearly every one of the circles of hell, and hell is organized like a funnel with different circles on the way down to the bottom where the devil is, encased in ice. In nearly every one of the circles of hell where a different sin is punished, in the stories of almost all of the damned that we meet on this journey, I saw something of myself that I had not recognized before. It's weird how that works, because Dante populated his hell with real people that he had known personally or had heard of in Tuscany. And that's one of the uncanny things about it, is these people are so recognizable as being just like us, and in my case, just like me, too many times. In every single instance of the damned that Dante meets, they are there because they made gods of their own egos, ordering all their passions to the supreme love of self. The first great breakthrough I had in my own personal healing came fairly early, when Dante and Virgil walk through the circle of the heretics. There, they're passing by open tombs with flames raging inside like braziers. This is the dwelling place of the Epicureans, those in Dante's time who denied the afterlife and who believed that this world and its pleasures were all that existed. From one of those tombs arises a proud, noble Florentine, a great warlord named Farinata, and he really existed in real life. Here's how Dante describes Farinata's first appearance in hell. Already I had fixed my eyes on his, and he was rising, lifting chest and brow, as though he held all hell in utter scorn. Farinata is an aristocrat of sublime haughtiness. The portrait Dante paints of him in just a few lines of verse is indelible. He writes, "When I stood at the foot of his tomb, he looked at me a moment, then he asked, almost in disdain, 'Who were your ancestors?'" Now think about that. Farinata is living for all eternity in hell. He has been condemned to be among the lowest of the low for eternity, and the first thing he wants to know is whether or not this extraordinary visitor from the mortal life, from his own city, he was a Tuscan, is sufficiently highborn to bother talking to. Farinata is keeping up appearances. He still believes that all the distinctions that he held on earth really do matter here in hell. And why not, given his belief that what we have here on earth in Florence, our magnificent city, is the only thing that matters. Well, Dante was a Florentine born a generation after Farinata into a rival political faction in Florence. So they end up engaged in political trash talk back and forth. Farinata standing in his flaming tomb and Dante standing beside it. As they talk, we learn that all Farinata cares about is his family, his political party, and his personal status in his glorious city. This had dramatic and destructive consequences, not only for his family, their city, their region, but also the church. This was what the world that Dante came from, a city and a region that was torn apart by people's pride in what they had in their own political party and in their families. This was a man, Farinata, whose passion for family and city destroyed his soul and helped cause a civil war that tore apart the city. Now, one way to think of the sin of heresy is mistaking one part of the truth for the whole truth. In this sense, the heresy of Farinata includes believing that truth consisted in their all-consuming love for family, for party, social status, and so forth. The thing is, there's really nothing wrong with loving your family, with loving your friends, with loving the people in your political party, with loving your city and your creed and wanting to see all these things flourish. The error comes in believing that these are ultimate ends. Now, this Dantean insight proved incredibly helpful to me in trying to untie the knot that had me bound after my return to my hometown in Louisiana. The divisions between my Louisiana family and me that had been there for most of my life proved impossible to bridge. And I couldn't figure this out. I loved them, and I knew they loved me. Still, with all that love between us, why did we struggle so nastily with each other? Why did we hurt each other so much? It was, I think, because our loves were disordered in the same way that Farinata's were. We loved good things, family, place, history, our legacy there, but we loved them in the wrong way. We made gods of them, and we made each other miserable because of it, and we prevented our family from living in peace with each other. Standing at Dante's side as he did this political trash talking with Farinata, it suddenly hit me. This is me and my father. Daddy was a Farinata of Star Hill. He was a great man who did so many great things, but he was stuck in the past. He was holding on to the same pride that made him see his son, his namesake, as a lesser man because the son was not the same kind of man he was, because his son had moved away and turned his back on family and place in my dad's judgment and in my sister's judgment. The difference, though, is that like Dante the Pilgrim, I had the freedom in real life to walk away from this trap of arguing with my dad, having this constant argument. I could walk away from it metaphorically. I could refuse to be bewitched by Farinata and drawn into this argument. Well, that was a real turning point for me. The epiphany I had by the light of Farinata's tomb had real spiritual consequences for me too. I had always believed, as a matter of faith, that God loved me, but I also believed that he couldn't possibly approve of me no matter what I did. My spiritual life, I suddenly came to see, had been for many years organized around appeasing a Father God who was unappeasable, because I couldn't make him happy. It had been built around the idea that if only I did the right thing to prove my love and loyalty, God would find me worthy of his love. But I couldn't do that, and therefore I didn't feel worthy of God's love. Well, it's pretty obvious where this came from, but it was not obvious to me because I was stuck in the middle of it. Once Dante unmasked this within me, I saw that I too was guilty of making false idols of family and place, that this warped the way I saw myself, the way I saw God, the way I saw everything. In my family, all of us were professed Christians, but it sometimes seemed, as it does with so many families, that our family's real religion was ancestor worship. I had made family and place, and above all my father, their embodiment as my personal gods. Now I saw that I was a heretic in a sense. I was an idol worshiper, just like Farinata. This was my greatest sin, and this is the thing that led me into the dark wood. It was my sin. It wasn't my dad's or my sister's. They had their own situation. This was something I had to take responsibility for, and I had to turn away from. All of this is like maybe 7 chapters into the Commedia, and my whole life was changing. Well, I took all of this to my priest in confession. I renounced my idol worship, and I asked for forgiveness and for the grace of healing. And after that moment, things began to change for me, for the better. It wasn't that I quit loving my dad or my family or my place, or I regretted even moving there, but rather I began to order these loves rightly. For me, the love of those goods, of family and place, could only be healthy if they were subordinated to the love of God. Well, the rest of my journey through the Commedia was a lot like this, an unmasking of my disordered love, a renunciation of it, and a firm intention to walk away from it, leave it behind, leave all this behind and keep walking toward the light. There's no time to go into all of this in detail, but I want to explore one more key moment, this one in purgatory. Now in the Commedia, the realm of purgatory is for those who have been saved by faith. In other words, you can't earn your way to purgatory. If you ask for God's mercy and just turn away one little bit from your own ego before you die, you will be saved. But those who did not live saintly lives on earth, they have to go through this period of purgation. Now, I'm not a Catholic, but you don't have to see it in a specifically theological way. The Purgatorio is, or the mountain of purgatory, because it's a mountain you have to wind your way around to go up. It is an allegory for the earthly life, for the life we live here, trying to turn away from our sins and our brokenness and to make things right. In Purgatorio, the poem, it's about strengthening the souls of those who are headed to heaven so they can bear the full weight of God's glory. If you've read C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, it's based on the Purgatorio. You might remember how the people, when they get off the bus, some of them can't walk on the blades of grass or like knives until they strengthen themselves spiritually with asceticism, with renunciation. That's what Purgatorio is about. Everyone in purgatory is suffering greatly, but they suffer with joy because they know all their sufferings are making themselves ready for the kingdom of heaven, for unification with God, who is love. They have to climb this tall mountain to strengthen their souls, as I said. Well, just as hell has different circles where particular sins are punished, purgatory has terraces or levels on the mountain where the tendency towards particular sins are purged. When I reached the terrace where wrath is burned away, I met, along with Dante the penitent, another penitent named Marco the Lombard. Marco and Dante end up talking in a cloud of choking, thick smoke with sparks flying all around them, because this is what wrath is like. It blinds us. It makes it where we can't breathe and we can't see straight. This is what my own anger towards my dad and my family over their rejection of me, that's what it was like for me. It was this anger and anxiety gnawing away at me at every single day that was keeping me physically ill and depressed. I couldn't let go of it, and I was powerless to do anything about it. My priest kept telling me that I had no right to this anger, but they treat me unfairly, I would say. That might be, he would say, but you're commanded by God, who is love, to love them in spite of this. I knew he was right. Even if I did not believe in God, I could say that this inability on my part to accept the injustice that I cannot change and to affirm the goodness of life anyway, that was an enormous barrier to my health and inner peace. So here at the midpoint of the entire Divine Comedy, 14,000 lines of verse, Dante meets a man who gives him the secret of deliverance from the dark wood. The pilgrim Dante tells Marco, I've come from the world, which is in a terrible state of violence and disorder. It's family against family. The church is against the people. There's corruption, there's suffering, there's war. Why do things get so messed up, Marco? Give me the secret so I can return to earth and tell others how to make things right. Here's how Marco replied. First he heaved a heavy sigh, which grief wrung to a groan, and then began, Brother, the world is blind, and indeed you come from it. Marco goes on to tell Dante that people on earth love to blame their problems on causes outside of themselves. This is partly true, he says, but it's also true that you have free will. If we'll use that free will to choose good over evil, to refuse evil, to choose to do the right thing, over and over and over, we will eventually find that our brokenness and our disorder has no power over us. Says Marco, therefore, if the world around you goes astray, in you is the cause, and in you let it be sought. Well, Marco's words hit me like a bolt of lightning. The Lombard, whose wrath had blinded him in the mortal life, delivered the same message that my therapist had on the first day of therapy. You can't change the world, but you can change the way you react to it. And it was the same message that my priest had been trying to get me to accept. You can't control the world, but you can control your own heart. And this, if you're going to change anything in the world, you have to start with your own heart. Now, I had understood the priest's words. I'm not an idiot. And I'd understood the therapist's words in a cognitive sense, but their true meaning had not sunk into my heart. Now, standing in my imagination, reading the book, within a black cloud of wrath, spite stinging my eyes, I heard the same message from this character, the penitent Marco, and finally, I got it. Marco helped me feel the malignant power of wrath, and he told me how to get rid of it, to stop blaming my family, my dead sister, my nature, or anything else for my sickness and depression. In me is the cause, and in me let it be sought. It was a matter of deciding to do it. It was a matter of will. All of these things I had been seeing on the journey, all I had learned about myself and others, all of it was useless unless I did something with these insights, unless I acted. In the third book of the Commedia, Paradiso, in heaven, Dante the pilgrim rises through the heavens and ultimately comes face to face with God. We don't have time to talk about all the things he saw in Paradiso and what I saw through Dante's eyes about what a life restored in love and full harmony would be like. But I do have to mention an encounter he had with a nun, Picarda. The pilgrim Dante, at this point in the poem, is hung up on the question of justice. And Picarda, who had been treated unjustly in life and who had been frankly abused by her brother, dragged her out of a convent and forced her to get married early, and she died. She had not risen to the level in heaven that Dante believed she should be. And he said, why did God do this to you? Why are you on the lowest level of heaven? It doesn't make sense. It's not your fault your brother did that, made you break your vows to the monastery. And Picarda says, you don't get it. In his will is our peace. I'm just happy to be here with him. You got to let this go. Just be happy to be with God. Well, I kept thinking about these words as I struggled to put aside my own anger over the injustice I was dealing with in my family. Father Matthew, my parish priest, kept telling me God is love himself, and God wills you to love even those who mistreat you, treat you unfairly. He said, I did not have the right to say no, not if I was going to be a Christian. If I was ever going to know true peace in my heart, Dante Spicard had told me, I was going to have to align myself with the will of God, who, as I believed, as Jesus Christ, loved even those who hated him and rejected him. This was a matter of dying to self, and that is not easy. That is so painful. I did not want to give up my claim of justice against my family. But I committed myself to that goal because what else am I going to do? I'm so sick. I can't just stand here on justice waiting for everything to sort itself out. So I committed myself to that goal even though I was terrible at realizing it. And every single day I had to commit to it, to use my free will, as Marco had told me, to force myself to get over myself. Well, I finished the Commedia just after Christmas that year, having spent 5 months reading it and meditating on it. I didn't notice until the new year, sometime in January, that I wasn't taking any long daily naps anymore. In fact, I felt physically better. I felt stronger. My soul felt lighter. I was on my way to healing. Now, as a Christian, I believe that healing came from God, but I tell you now that the chief medium through which he sent that healing was the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. Well, why a poem? Or rather, how with a poem? I'll tell you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a voracious reader, but I read very little fiction and almost no poetry. What I did not understand about myself was that my chronically analytical nature was at the core of my problem. I really did believe that there was no problem that I could not think myself through, or if I found the right book and found the right argument, then everything would be clear to me, then the problem would be dispelled. The trouble is that without knowing it, I had erected sophisticated defenses in my mind to knock down any proposition, anything I heard that threatened the way I saw the world, no matter how dysfunctional that way was. And I didn't even know this myself. I was a stranger to myself. Now, when I entered the world of Dante, the world of fiction, I found myself in a realm of a different kind of knowing. At some point on this pilgrimage, I can't say when, I forgot that I was an outside observer reading about this character named Dante going through the pits of hell and up the mountain of purgatory, but I felt that I was experiencing it myself. And here's something really interesting I learned. Neuroscientists have evidence that when a person reads moral instruction presented as nonfiction and then reads the same moral point presented as a story, they're much more likely to be changed when it's presented in story form. Why? Here's something cool. It seems that when you read a story about a man, say a man walking up a mountain, the parts of your brain that light up when you walk also light up. There's something in the architecture of our brains that incarnates ideals into our own bodies when they come to us as stories or as works of art, as opposed to abstract principles or arguments. So Dante's poem, this work of staggering beauty, saved me by engaging my imagination and helping me see things that I could not grasp in a transformative way that when they were in the form of a proposition. As I said, we so often think that if we just discover the right facts or the perfect argument, all our problems will be solved. But what if the problem is not so much a failure of cognition, but of imagination? The Commedia is one of the most philosophically, theologically, and aesthetically complex works of art ever created by human mind. But in the end, its message is not, you must convert your mind, but you must convert your heart. Dante, as I said, never again went home to Florence. He died in exile, and he taught me that to live in this world is to be in permanent exile. Every one of us are wayfarers and exiles, but not all of us know it. What we make of our exile will determine our fate in life and in the afterlife, if you believe in that kind of thing. The poet discovered on the real journey of his life, after being cast out of the Garden of Eden, that for him was medieval Florence, that he had made idols of all the good things he knew there, his literary achievements, his service in government, his status, his family, the city he loved, and so forth. He had to be stripped of every one of those things, like Job, to see the truth of his life. And so did I. Dante the poet told one of his patrons that he intended the Commedia to be used by the reader, to be a work that takes the reader from a state of despair into a state of happiness, of bliss. That's exactly how it worked for me. Sure, it's one of the greatest literary masterpieces of Western civilization, but for me, not a scholar, not an aesthete, but a castaway, shipwrecked in the middle of his life, that poem was a message in a bottle that contained a map showing me the way home. At the end of last summer, my dad died. Thanks to what Dante did for me, I was able to spend that last year and a half with him in a much more peaceful and loving frame of mind. Daddy didn't change, not really, but I changed. It was hard and it was imperfect. Dying to one's own pride always is, but it was real. For all of my life, I expected the day that my dad died to be pretty close to a personal apocalypse for me. That's how much I revered him. That's how much him and loving him and his approval was, and his presence was the ground of my life. But last summer, when he entered home hospice care and his death approached, there was no fear. I wasn't afraid of anything. When the end came, I moved into his bedroom at home and lived there with him for 8 days. My mom was exhausted, caring for him. He had been in decline for so long, and she just couldn't do it anymore. So that's okay. I want to be here. I want to help. And I moved in with him, and I and his faithful friend John, we watched him, we fed him, we gave him his medicine, and I prayed for him. I'd sit there in his bed when he was awake praying for him. I would read the Psalms over him. When he was slept, I would pray for him. At his bedside, remembering Dante's instruction that no spiritual progress happens without humility, I asked for forgiveness from my niece Claire, the middle daughter of my sister. She came home from boarding school and we told him, Papa's dying, you need to get on home. I asked her to sit there and pray, because she's an evangelical Christian. I said, do you want to pray with over Papa with me? She said, sure. So after he fell asleep, I asked her to forgive me for hurting her. She had frozen this out for years. She immediately she got emotional and asked me to forgive her. We were reconciled right there at my dad's deathbed, and because Dante insisted on love and humility over pride and holding on to grudges, and taught me that. Over the past 6 months since Daddy died, new life has come into my family from that moment. That was a gift of God to us through Dante. Well, when my dad took his final breath, I was holding his hand. My mom had the other hand. He was surrounded by all the family, all his grandchildren, his old friends. He died at home just as he wanted to. He left this world as he had always asked God to let him leave there, surrounded by the love of family in the place he loved more than anything. And he left this world in peace with me, his only son and his last surviving child. Now, on this day I had dreaded all my life, I had no tears. There was only gratitude. Gratitude for the gift of my father's life, for all the good things he had given me, and gratitude that because of this difficult journey with Dante, I was able to receive my father's life and his beautiful death as a gift, as a resolution. Daddy died in the afternoon, but I didn't make it back to my own house nearby till later that night. And I sat down at my kitchen table, exhausted, thinking about the past 8 days, how tumultuous they had been. But why did I feel so serene about my father's passing? I mean, for heaven's sake, this is when one's dad dies, this is a big moment for anybody's life, and especially for me, for whom my dad was just this looming giant. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel like I was suppressing anything. I felt so serene, like there was perfect order. And I felt the presence of God so powerfully. Then I knew the reason. It was in the words of Piccardo from Paradiso. In his will is our peace. That was it. That was the secret. That was the first time, and that was the first and only time that I cried after Daddy died, and they were tears of gratitude. Because I had started walking the hard road up the mountain of renunciation, trying to move beyond myself and towards harmony with the love that moves the sun and all the other stars, that's how Dante called God, the love that moves the sun and all the other stars, had drawn me to himself, out of myself. I had been given the gift of peace. Now, this love I discovered through Dante was not a soft, emotional, comforting, sentimental love. It was something much harder and much more real. Flannery O'Connor said, "To expect too much is to have a sentimental view of life, and this is a softness that ends in bitterness. Charity is hard and endures." This, right there, that line of Flannery O'Connor, says where I started and where I ended with Dante. This is what the Divine Comedy teaches as well. The kind of love that endures, it's free, but it cost everything. Its reward came to me on the most dread day of my life in a peace that I could not understand, but I could only embrace, recognize, and rejoice in. For the first and only time since Daddy died, as I said, I cried, and they were tears of joy. This is how Dante saved my life. How can he save your life? By revealing to you, if you're open to it, your true self. By showing you that change is going to be difficult, but change is possible. Peace is possible. Wholeness is possible. And by helping you to see that real love, is at the heart of human existence and only needs to be rightly directed away from ourselves and towards other people and God to flourish. Thank you for listening to my story. Happy to take some questions.
Okay, I'll ask Deanne to be on that side, and I'll be on this side. So who wants first? Oh.
Can you talk a little bit about your sister? And you wrote a book about her as well. And how does she play into this? You had this sort of epiphany with Dante after she had passed away, right? And how did your father handle her death? And how does that play into this? I assume there's a story there.
And a very human story. My sister Ruthie, I wrote a book about her called The Little Way of Ruthie Lemming. She was saintly. She really was. And she was a high school, the reference, if you're Catholic, you know, it's to Saint Therese of Lisieux, who called it her petite voie, her little way, the way of just finding holiness by loving those around you and doing the best you can, no matter, even if it's not meant to be anything on the grand stage of life. Well, that was my sister Ruthie. She taught school for many years. She taught a lot of poor kids and helped them. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And the whole town loved her so much that when she was dying, they came out to help her in every way possible. In seeing the effect of the life my sister had lived there in that little town, I could see the spiritual grandeur of her life, a life lived in a small way, just loving those around you and faithfully serving them. And it converted me. It made me realize the true worth of her way of life. And I wanted to move back and be a part of that life, and so did my wife. As I was writing the book, The Little Way of Ruthie Lemming, I got to almost the very end, and there was one chapter left to write, and I planned to take my niece Hannah, my sister's oldest daughter, to Paris. I'd always promised her, Uncle Rod will take you to Paris one day if he ever has the money. Well, I had the money that spring, and she was in a lot of pain because she had run away from her mother's death. And my family, we love to, everything's always fine, it's fine, it's fine. You know, we don't deal with things that aren't fine very well. So I thought I'd just take Hannah there for Easter, and it'd be a good way for her to get things started again in her life. Well, she told me there on our last night in Paris, she said, Uncle Rod, I'm so worried that you and Aunt Julie are going to have a tough time here. And she told me about how their mom had raised them and how Pawpaw, she called him, my dad, had facilitated this. It was a complete shock to me because I had by then, I hero worshiped my sister. You know, I'd almost finished this book talking about her as a saint. And the fact that she held this inner grudge at me and nursed it, that's how our people are. You know, we know who we are by who we hate. And that she had held that in her own heart was something that just, I didn't know what to do. I almost fell apart over it. And I talked to her best friend about it when I got back to Louisiana, and her friend Abby said, that's how Ruthie was. You know, I don't know what it was about you, but that's how she was. I had to struggle with that. And my dad couldn't accept it either because my sister was, you know, was his heart. And he couldn't accept that she had done this and couldn't accept that he had done it himself. And that was the thing that was so frustrating to me because these are not bad people. These are not only good people, they're great people. My dad did so much in his life, and that was the thing that I struggled with. How is it that they can be so loving, and they've been so loving to me over the course of my life, and yet, as I said, Dante helped me understand that this is not, they loved me so much, she loved me so much that she wanted me to have the highest good, which to her was being right here with the family, on the land, and never leaving it. You know, she could not understand. To her, it was a failure on my part, a grotesque failure, and to my dad, failure of love to walk away from that. You know, and she never forgave me for it. So what I had to do, I was so angry at my sister, and I couldn't receive satisfaction. When she was first diagnosed with cancer, I sat with her on her front, I flew down from Philly, and sat with her on her front porch, and asked her to forgive me for any ways I had hurt her. And because we don't deal with emotion well, she just started crying and just did like this. I thought this was her dismissing all the things between us. It wasn't. She was just saying, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. And she carried that grudge with her until she died. And I was angry at her for that, but I had to get over it. As my wife told me, she goes, you know, Ruthie can see you now, you know, and she knows your heart, and she knows what went wrong. She's living in perfect peace. You need to let go. And that's what Dante helped me do. But the difficult thing, as I said, was trying to reconcile the fact that these were not villains at all. These were wonderful, saintly people. And yet, somebody else?
You mentioned a couple times that you aren't a big reader of fiction and poetry, or haven't been. So after such a transformative experience, has this changed? I mean, I know it hasn't been that long, but has this changed your reading habits or your plans going forward? Do you want to incorporate more poetry and or fiction into your reading in hopes of maybe having more further experiences? Maybe not quite as great as Dante, but...
Well, you know, as my wife pointed out to me, because I thought it was just I don't know why I was in the poetry section. She pointed out to me much later, you know, you were probably there because when we moved back to Louisiana, we involved our older son in a classical Christian tutorial where they read the Odyssey, and I read the Odyssey with him. And I'd never read that. I mean, I'm a very badly educated person, and I'm like, this is awesome, this is so great, and we enjoyed so much talking about the things we read in the Odyssey. And it's probably true that in some way I was over there wondering, am I going to have this experience again in another poem? That may well be the case. I didn't know, can't remember where my own mind was that day. But I struggle with fiction still because it's not so much that I don't like fiction, it's that there's so much else I want to read. And I'm a journalist. I'm always reading, you know, things I can write about. But last year, a book fell into my hands, a book called Laurus, L-A-U-R-U-S, by a Russian writer, modern Russian writer, named Evgeny Vodolaskin. And it's a story of a medieval holy man. It's total fiction. And I started reading it because it sounded interesting to me. I love the Middle Ages. The book I'm working on now was about the Middle Ages. And it did the same thing. It was one of these Dante-like things where I was so taken up into it. I didn't learn anything that I probably didn't already know theologically, but oh, it was so transformative. And I need to learn to open myself up to these experiences more and more. It shouldn't be, people who love fiction, like my wife, it's so easy for them. I don't know why it's hard for me. I forced myself to read the Brothers Karamazov after the Dante thing because this is good for me. I know it's good for me. I know it's good for me, but it just, I got 100 pages from the end and I still haven't finished it. And people who love the Brothers K are like, what is wrong with you? I know I'm one of the founders of the Walker Percy Weekend. We do a Walker Percy Festival in my hometown. We'll have our third one this June. And people come to town, they're like, oh, I'm so glad y'all are doing this. Now, what's your favorite Walker Percy novel? Like, I don't have one. All I love is nonfiction. Oh, okay. Character flaw. But to answer your question, I want to open myself up more to fiction because it helps me. Well, let me put it like this. I came back to Christianity. I put my faith aside as a teenager. I was very, angry, and I thought I knew everything about the faith. And then my mom won a trip to Europe and sent me. She wanted a church raffle, and she didn't want to go. So I was on this tour bus with these old people, and I couldn't wait to get to Paris. And I'd read my Hemingway. I'm like, here we go. But the bus stops at a church an hour outside of Paris on the way, and I wanted to get off the bus. I didn't want to get off the bus. I was like, come on, let's go. But I'm not going to sit on a bus for an hour, so I went in. This was the Chartres Cathedral, and it knocked me flat. I had nothing in my experience had prepared me for architecture, for beauty that intense and that complex. And it was beauty that came out of a vision of the cosmos and of God. I didn't walk out of that church as a Christian again, but I walked out of there onto something. I was onto a mystery, and I could not be satisfied until I knew that mystery in my heart, and that's how I eventually reconverted or returned to my faith. But it was not about argument. It was about beauty. And it's about, and I can see also in Dante this cathedral in verse from the same time period roughly as the Chartres Cathedral. It was beauty that reached me where argument could not. And I have to always keep that in my mind, that you just don't know what beauty can do.
I'm from a small town about 60 miles north of here, Lampasas, and then I came to the big city it's about half my life now. But yeah, I went to the school, now I work for the school and absorbing the city dynamic. And I've just got some notes here. Virgil was a country boy. He was a literal pagan, not just a theological pagan. He wrote the Georgics, celebrating country and farming life. Dante's really a city boy. He's the Holy Civitas, the Augustinian holy city. And you write, that's kind of your core specialty, is writing about the small town, big town, country mouse, city mouse dynamic. And I really don't have a question, but just could you just elaborate more on that? But
it's such a complicated thing. I don't know that I've got it figured out myself. In fact, I know I don't have it figured out myself. I loved the city life. I absolutely loved it. And what I loved about it, what made me desire it, was there were bookstores there. There were movie theaters. There was life. There were people. It was pretty lonely out in the country when people didn't live close by. And if you don't like sports, you don't like hunting and fishing, there's not a lot to do. For my sister, that was paradise. And some people say to me, having read Little Way, they say, oh, well, your sister probably resented you because she wanted to go away and you did, and she had to stay there. I'm like, oh, you totally misunderstand my sister. She was in paradise. She couldn't, if she resented me, it was because she couldn't understand what was wrong with me, that I didn't realize that this is paradise. Well, I've come back to the town, and and it's not because I suddenly found that I love small towns after all, though I have come, and it's amazing. Every time when I go to New York or somewhere like that now in my elderly years, I tell my wife, I said, man, I could never do that again. I've come to really love the rhythms of living out in the country and of living in a small town and of knowing people when you go to the coffee shop. And so it's something that I've had to come to later in my life, when the passions that were within me that impelled me to go out and experience the world and throw yourself into the middle of that, that's not what I want anymore. And I think that it took my sister's passing to reveal to me the deep, deep beauty and goodness that can be in small town life. It's not that suddenly I decided cities were bad places. They're not. Or small towns are not suddenly Arcadia. They're not. But I'll tell a funny story. I didn't put this in the book. When Ruthie died, flew down from Philly, and Julie had to come with the kids later, and I flew down immediately, and I was over at my sister's house, and all their friends came around that's how we do. They bring beer, they bring food, and everybody's there to support Mike, my brother-in-law. And it was a very convivial place, as my sister would have liked, because her kitchen was the heart of her home, and she was always cooking for people, and they were telling funny stories. Well, one of her friends said, "Y'all, this kitchen full of people, y'all, did y'all hear about that one-legged stripper at Illusions?" Illusions is a redneck stripper club just over the Mississippi state line in a double-wide trailer. I am not making it up. Am I making this up? No, I'm not making this up. And I said, wait, a one-legged stripper in Illusions? That can't be true. And my inner Flannery O'Connor is just quivering. And she said, well, Mama said that she's down there. Mama doesn't know what to do about it. And I said, this can't be true. And then one of my brother-in-law's firefighter buddies comes in, and he hears what we're saying. He goes, oh, no, I've been there. And he pulls out his BlackBerry. See, here she is. And there she was working the stump on a pole. And I was like, this is awesome. This is the best. And I made a beeline right across the yard to where my dad was sitting on the back porch with his old farmer buddy. And I said, Daddy, you're not going to believe this. And I told him the story. And the old farmer said, oh, yeah, I heard about her. Old Terry went up there to get him a lap dance one time, and her prosthesis fell off. He was mighty surprised. And I remember thinking, you idiot, you live in Philadelphia, and you're a writer. This is where the material is. So yeah, there's so much drama and beauty and passion and pathos in small town life, and I'm privileged to live there now. But I think before, when I was younger and I was so out of place there, I felt that if I just found my right place, the geographical cure would work. It doesn't work. Wherever you go, you're still in exile. And the pilgrimage I had to make inside myself, the one I just told you about, is the one that made it possible ultimately for me to live in this small town. And it's the one that made it possible, if I lived in a big city again, it would make it possible for me to be there, because I had to get comfortable with myself and my own world. Come to St. Francisville to Walker Percy Weekend or anything, I will not take you to Illusions.
You've talked about sometimes the competing claims between family and personal work. And if your whole family is getting together and you think, well, I should be there, but I also feel like there's this other claim that's being made on my time to work or some other group that you're committed to. How have you learned to manage and to be able to tell which is the most important claim at any given moment when family and other responsibilities pull?
Well, my wife were here, she could tell you that I haven't learned how to do it very well at all. It's a constant struggle with me in work, because this is part of the whole loving in the wrong way. I mean, I consider myself to be a pretty slothful person, not because I'm lazy, but because I don't order my time rightly. I just spent a week in a Benedictine monastery in the mountains of Umbria interviewing monks for this next book I'm working on. And it was so fascinating to me to hear them talk about how the rule of St. Benedict keeps them on the straight and narrow in a good way, because it tells them now is the time to put the work down and come pray, or now is the time to stop praying and go to work. That is something, that self-regulation, that I have struggled with all my life, because once I get into something, I mean, I can be writing and suddenly look up and it's midnight. And that's not fair to my family, and that's just wrong. That is a form of slothfulness, of not being able to control your time. In another way, though, I've had to learn that for us, the church comes first. It really does. I remember when we moved back, my mom was angry because we wouldn't come to Sunday, or we were late for Sunday dinner because our church was in Baton Rouge and we'd have to go that far. And I kept learning, over time, that if I'm going to keep things rightly ordered in my own life, that the things of God have to come first. It's not that it's an either or, it's that this is the priority. If this is the priority, everything else falls into line. We wanted to teach our children and ourselves that priority. So when we started an Eastern Orthodox mission in our town, and if you want to see strange, come pray the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, which is a 6th century Byzantium, on the bayou. It's a wonderful, marvelous thing about our age. But our priest said, we're coming out of the Russian tradition, and we do Vespers on Saturday night. If you want to receive communion on Sunday morning, you come to Vespers on Saturday night, an hour of evening prayer. I thought it was the most outrageous thing. Saturday night? Really? 6 to 7? We go to a football game, or there's a dinner party, or a crawfish boil. Priest is like, hey, that's just how it is here. So we had to discipline ourselves. We had to realize that to show our children this was a priority, it had to be a priority with us. And over, just getting used to grinding your teeth and going, now I really wouldn't miss it. I really wouldn't, because it has rightly ordered so many things by learning to put God first. I know this is not a religious talk, but that is the truth. And so I have got to get better about making my family more important than my work. But it's a slow walk up that mountain.
My secular friends in Austin, which is to say roughly all my friends in Austin, will think of the medieval world as a good reason why religion should be privatized and pushed out of the public square into the private world. And I'll kind of counter-argue, look at the Renaissance, look at the beauty of the Renaissance and how integrated the science of the time was with the spirituality of the time, whereas a few centuries later, after Descartes, it becomes more science versus religion into our current era. You have been writing a lot about recovering a kind of sacramental metaphysics from the medieval world, but I haven't seen you write so much about what comes right after, the High Middle Ages, then the Renaissance, and how that worldview changes. Just wonder if you could speak to that.
What's interesting about that is Dante comes at the very end of the Middle Ages. He is the hinge point between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It's fascinating to consider that only 40 years separate Dante from Petrarch, the father of the Renaissance, but a whole world changes. And I've been lately trying to study and figure out what was it? Why did the Middle Ages, the consensus, fall apart? And part of it was intellectual, but part of it too, I think, has to do with all the fighting that people did, the things that Dante protested against, the fact that all that intellectual coherence, spiritual coherence, couldn't hold everything together. And we have to remember that the Renaissance really got underway after the Black Death went through Europe and killed 1/3 of the Europeans. And so something that traumatic is going to shake up the ways of seeing the world. And of course, we know the corruption in the church had its role too to play. But I think that would not want to put down any good thing that came from the Renaissance or minimize the bad things in the Middle Ages. But the thing that I love about the medieval period is there is that sense of sacramentalism, the idea that you see this so magnificently in the Divine Comedy, the idea that everything is holy and everything is ordered. In the Benedictine monastery, one of the monks was telling me, in the rule of St. Benedict, we're taught, St. Benedict tells us to regard our tools, even the dishes that we use, as if they were holy vessels of the altar. Now that can seem incredibly oppressive sometimes. I mean, I have to be careful with this dish, that it's like a holy, but I think in a time like ours, when everything seems so washed out and nothing seems to have particular meaning, there's real liberation in living in a society where people regard things as sacred. This stream, God is somehow in that, and we need to treat it better. When I was in the monastery last week, this really kind of shook me up. I was in a house an apartment that the monks used for guests, and I was in one of the bedrooms there. Toward the very end, a man came in to stay. I thought he was just a pilgrim. He was from Bari in Italy, a town in the far south of Italy, and he was very dark-skinned, very thin, kind of poor the way he looked, but I just thought he was a pilgrim. Spoke very little English, and You know, it was kind of uncomfortable being with him because we didn't speak any English, and we wanted to communicate, but I don't have any Italian. Turns out, after a day or so, he made me understand that he was homeless. He's a homeless man. No job, no family, nothing. The monk, he comes through Norcia every now and then where the monastery was, and the monks give him a place to stay for 3 days. It shocked me. If I had known that a homeless man was in my apartment, I would have freaked out. I'm so middle class. I would have been like, am I going to be safe here? Are my things going to be safe? But those monks saw him as a person first. They saw him as a man of worth. I would have known it up here, but if I had really known what I was talking to, the monks see him as Jesus because they say the rule tells them receive all visitors as Christ. And so that's how he was to me at first, too, just a fellow pilgrim. And that's how he was in truth. But it really convicted me of my own prejudice, and I didn't see him as a real person at first. And thank God for those monks, seeing God is present in all people and in all things. And we have to treat them in a precious way. They taught me a big lesson. Probably the biggest lesson I learned there is to realize this is real. I mean, these people, if I believe what I say is true, then that man was like Christ to me, as he was to the monks. And that's a pretty great way to live, I think. Oh, one more.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit about the Benedictine option that I read about in your blog or online at American Conservative, or is that out of the range of what we're talking about here?
Well, it's not really a Dante thing, but I'll very briefly say this is the book I'm working on now. I'm working on a book about what we in the 21st century can learn from the Benedictine monks who arose, say Benedict arose out of the ruins of the fall of the Roman Empire. He just wanted to figure out a way to live in a holy way, in a human way, amid all this chaos. And he ended up founding a monastic order. And that order ended up becoming incredibly important over the next few centuries, the so-called Dark Ages, the early Middle Ages. Because what the monks did, in going out and evangelizing, moving into Northern Europe, building monasteries, they taught people how to pray, and they taught people how to read, they taught people how to garden. So much basic life information was lost when Rome fell. And what these monks did was lay the groundwork for the rebirth of civilization in the West. And Pope Benedict said a few years ago, in 2012, that the West is facing now a crisis of civilization unlike any we've seen since the fall of Rome in the 5th century. And it's a very different kind of crisis because clearly we have a lot of material wealth now, but it's the same kind of thing, the chaos, the loss of a sense of coherence and meaning. So what I'm trying to do is ask, what would a modern day St. Benedict do? What would he have to tell us? Is there wisdom that we can learn from the way the Benedictine monks, who are still around, still living by the rules St. Benedict wrote in the forest south of Rome? What can we learn from them in our own time? And that's why I was in Italy recently. And that's what this book is about, the Benedict option, choosing to live as St. Benedict, and even though we're lay people and maybe not even all Catholic. So it'll be out in the spring, and maybe sooner if the trumpeting continues. Yeah, I got last night after the debate, people were putting in my Twitter feed, I think the subtext of this whole thing is Benedict option now. So anyway, thank you all.
Thanks very much. Thank you all for coming. Matt, on the way out, has some brochures with more information about the Austin Institute. Our next event will be on March the 21st, which for the students is the day after they come back from spring break, which isn't great, but it's the one day that our speaker could be in town. We'll have Chris Serpinaut talking about the importance of free choice as part of human well-being. So that promises to be an interesting talk as well, and we'll have more details online, so go ahead and follow us on Twitter or watch the website. Thank you all very much, and have a good evening.